May 1st, 1982, Mayday in North London. Traditionally a day of marches, joy and celebration, but this year it landed right on top of one of the most volatile fixtures in English football. Arsenal versus West Ham United. On paper, it wasn't the fiercest rivalry in London. Arsenal saved their real hatred for Tottenham. West Ham reserved theirs for Millwall. But football doesn't run on paper, and by 1982, reputations mattered more than league positions, and West Ham arrived carrying the heaviest reputation of them all. The intercity firm weren't just known, they were feared. Home and away, north or south, they had made a habit of doing what few others dared, walking into opposition strongholds and claiming them. At Highbury, that meant the North Bank, sacred ground to Arsenal supporters, a steep, packed terrace that could hold close to 20,000 when full. So when word spread in the days leading up to the match that West Ham were planning a push into the North Bank, plenty of people made the decision not to be there at all. The attendance, just over 34,000, was low for a London derby, even by the standards of the time. Parents stayed away, older supporters stayed home. Those who turned up knew exactly what kind of afternoon this might become. Inside the ground, the tension was immediate. West Ham supporters filtered into the North Bank early, deliberately so. Groups gathered high up on the terrace, testing the mood, feeling for weakness. Arsenal fans clocked it straight away. This wasn't accidental, this was a statement. Police presence was visible but stretched, and as kickoff approached, rumours flew about weapons being smuggled in and about an organised charge down the steps. By 2:45, West Ham numbers had swelled at the top of the North Bank. Fighting broke out almost immediately, and 10 minutes later, as the match was barely underway, something happened that nobody inside Highbury would ever forget. An orange smoke bomb detonated in the North Bank, flooding the terrace in thick, choking smoke. Visibility dropped to nothing. Panic rippled through the crowd. For a few minutes, the entire ground seemed to grind to a halt. That moment would come to symbolize the day, chaos, confusion, and control slipping away. But the smoke was only the beginning, because what followed would see the ICF driven back, penned in by police, escorted out under pressure, and then, away from the ground, football would exact its highest possible price. This is the story of the day Highbury changed forever. The orange haze hung over the North Bank for several minutes, drifting across the pitch and forcing the players to pause, unsure whether the game could even continue. Supporters coughed, rubbed their eyes, shouted to one another in confusion. Some tried to move away from the worst of it. Others stood their ground, unwilling to give up a single step. Contrary to what the tabloids would later report, the smoke bomb didn't come from the West Ham end. Multiple accounts from inside the North Bank agree it was set off by an Arsenal supporter, not as an act of panic, but as a deliberate show of defiance. A message, loud and unmistakable. This was Arsenal territory. And it worked, because as the smoke cleared, something had changed. For years, West Ham's intercity firm had walked into grounds with an expectation that resistance would fold. But the Arsenal boys didn't retreat. They surged forward. Fighting broke out across the terrace. Not one mass charge, but dozens of brutal, close-quarters confrontations. Punches thrown on concrete steps. Men kicked as they fell. Stewards overwhelmed almost instantly. Police forced into the middle of it just to stop bodies piling up. The ICF found themselves under pressure from all sides. Arsenal fans who had grown up watching their end taken in previous years weren't interested in posturing this time. They pushed back hard, forcing the West Ham group downward, step by step, until police had no choice but to intervene. Gary Prince, an Arsenal fan who was there that day, remembers, "It kicked off all day from the moment the ground opened. We were all in the North Bank and it had been flaring up with small groups of West Ham fans. Then the main lot arrived and the smoke bomb went off. It was pandemonium." Paul Deneen, another Arsenal supporter, added, "We were not having it on this day. We were well up for West Ham, unlike other seasons where we were too blasé about it. We were in early and put ourselves about. After the smoke bomb went off, we again went straight into them. Those that still stood were surrounded at the back of the North Bank." What followed was something rarely seen at Highbury. Police formed a protective ring around the West Ham supporters, not to help them attack, but to stop them being completely overrun. Batons were out, orders shouted, lines held with difficulty as Arsenal fans tried repeatedly to break through and finish them off. The players were taken to the dressing rooms for almost 20 minutes whilst police tried to regain control. At that time, Arsenal manager Terry Neal told a reporter, "If this violence continues, the fans will have the game stopped." What kind of parents produce mindless morons like these? If I had behaved like that, it would have been a kick in the rear and a whack round the ear from my father. The match itself, a 2-0 win for Arsenal, with goals from Graham Rix and Alan Sunderland, played out almost as background noise. Few inside the North Bank could tell you when the goals were scored, only that the fighting never truly stopped. Missiles were thrown back and forth. Police dragged individuals from the crowd. The tension never eased. It simply simmered, waiting for the final whistle. By full time, West Ham supporters were still penned in, surrounded by police and escorted out of the ground under heavy protection. It was the first time many had seen the ICF leave an away end not by choice but by necessity. And yet, for all the violence inside the stadium, the worst of the day still lay ahead. Because once the crowd spilled onto the streets of North London, control slipped completely. Highbury sat in a tight web of streets, pubs and underground stations, so no amount of planning could predict what would happen once people scattered. Small groups peeled off, others doubled back, some went looking. Skirmishes broke out along Highbury Hill, behind the West Stand, and around the surrounding roads. Nothing on the scale of what had happened inside the ground, but sharp, nasty clashes, quick exchanges before police arrived, fists thrown, people chased, then gone. And then there was the Arsenal Underground station. After the match, a 24-year-old Arsenal supporter, John Dickinson, was ambushed by a group of West Ham fans near the station area. He was stabbed and later died from his injuries. The violence that had rumbled through the terraces and streets had finally crossed the one line that football can never come back from. News of the stabbing spread quickly. The mood shifted instantly. What had been spoken about earlier in the day as trouble was now something far more serious. Police flooded the area. Arrests were made, statements taken, cordons put in place. But despite the scale of the investigation, no one was ever convicted for the killing. There were rumors, however, that the murderer got his comeuppance at the hands of his fellow ICF boys. A few days later, football reporter Steve Curry wrote, "I watched a young man die this weekend, stabbed to death in the street by a gang of rampaging teenage football hooligans. The game was long over when I strolled towards Arsenal Tube Station to take the Underground to where I had parked my car. Suddenly, from the mouth of the station spewed 100 or so youths stampeding towards me like cattle. They thundered by, swung left, and out of sight. But as I turned towards the stadium, I saw a body across the pavement. There was a car parked alongside, and at first I thought he was looking underneath it. Then I saw the blood pumping from his chest and spreading over his t-shirt. His breathing was shallow, blood was trickling from his mouth. I whistled for the police parked by the station. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but for that particular fan, there will be no more football. I weep for the victim, 24-year-old Arsenal fan John Dickinson, as I weep for the game I have loved for a lifetime and which I have reported for 20 years. There had been trouble at Highbury before, but never this. May 1st, 1982 crossed a line that football can never step back over. What began as a familiar ritual of bravado and territory ended with a young man losing his life. For Arsenal, it was the end of something. The North Bank would never again be what it had been. Firms found themselves squeezed out of the terraces and pushed into the margins, where surveillance and intelligence slowly replaced chaos. For West Ham, the day became part of a wider reckoning. The ICF's reputation was already set, but Highbury 1982 hardened attitudes both inside football and far beyond it. What had once been dismissed as aggro was now impossible to ignore. And for football itself, this was one of those moments that forced change, not overnight and not gently, but permanently. The violence didn't stop immediately, but the consequences began to arrive faster, heavier, and with far less tolerance. Highbury would go on to host European nights, title races, and cup finals before it closed its gates for the last time in 2006. But this day remains cemented in everyone's memory, and it still stands as one of the darkest moments in British football history.